So this presentation will be recorded and will be accessible via the PTSA website. So we hope that you will share with those that were not able to join us tonight. I will also note that this is a joint presentation sponsored by both the PTSA and Yorktown Guidance. It's been a great partnership, and we hope that you will continue to support the PTSA by joining, if you haven't already done so. If you just point your camera on your phone to the QR code, it'll take you directly to the site, either to join as a member or to make a donation. Every little bit makes a difference, and it goes towards presentations and events that we hold throughout the year. So with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Cindy Cervini, the head of guidance, who will get us started for this evening. Cindy?
Thank you, Mrs. Tomini. I'm really happy to have Wendy Segal back with us again. I don't know how many years we've been doing this in a row, but probably like a good 6, maybe more. When you guys got up this morning, your first thought wasn't like, wow, thank goodness our guidance department gets along with an independent college consultant. And if you didn't say that, you should, because it's so rare, because usually guidance counselors, school counselors, and independent college consultants are like Hatfields and McCoys. They don't get along. And when I go to directors meetings, they all complain about independent consultants. And we are so blessed to have Wendy Segal in our community working with our children, our students. She brings a wealth of knowledge, 35 years of experience working with the young people of Yorktown and the surrounding areas. And I guess now, Wendy, with virtual, you're probably expanding. She could give you a little bit more background, but for our guidance counselors, she is the go-to. She is a good voice of reason. She studies this like people study statistics, sports statistics. She really has a lot of good angles and good advice on colleges. She has an interesting blog that everybody should sign up for after tonight. We're really fortunate to have her discuss, and she was able to pivot as soon as the pandemic hit. She started gaining information about colleges and how they're viewing college admission tests. And again, it's changing. Colleges are SATs and ACTs are being offered. And as parents, we want to know what is the best route for my child. So without further ado, I'll introduce Wendy Segal to start our presentation.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That's really kind. It's easy for me to be an enthusiastic supporter of the guidance department because Yorktown is blessed with a superior guidance department, really. And I'm not just saying that because my own children did well going through Yorktown High School, but because I see students from all the surrounding areas, I know how busy guidance counselors are. But I also know that they're generalists in a lot of ways, and they have to deal with kids' schedules changing or parents divorcing or all sorts of issues that come up in a student's life that affects them academically. Whereas getting a student from high school into college is really my sole focus. And Yorktown High School counselors are not only knowledgeable, but they're confident enough to say, I don't know, when they don't know, and they don't make up answers, which is not something I see all over the place. So I'm delighted to be able to work with Yorktown Guidance Department and provide whatever help I can. I've been doing this, as Ms. Cervini said, for 35 years, this being tutoring kids for SATs and then ACTs and helping them get into college, and anything to do with that, from testing to applications to essays to how to interview at colleges and how to select which colleges are best to apply to and which ones have a reputation for being generous and which ones have a reputation for being socially progressive versus socially conservative. anything to do with getting a student into a college that's a good fit for that student is something that I'm interested in and have involved myself with for many years. I understand that so I've been doing this just ages and ages and ages with all kinds of kids. Some kids who can barely make it out of high school because of everything from motivational issues to learning concerns, as well, all the way to the other side of the spectrum, where to kids who are primarily applying to Ivy League and schools that are similar to Ivy Leagues, and everything in between. So I understand that there's a chat that you can ask questions and that Ms. Servini will see. And so I'm going to
Wendy, if I could
pause.
interject, I did
Yeah.
forget that in the housekeeping. There is a Q&A feature that everybody should be able to access, and we do encourage you to input any questions you may have during the presentation into there. We will try to get to them either within the presentation or at the end through a Q&A session. There is also a chat feature, but the chat feature only reaches the panelists. So we would encourage you to use the Q&A if possible.
Great. Okay. So those, I'm going to stop periodically and hopefully be able to take a look at some of the questions. But if you have a question that's very specific to your student and you think really it wouldn't pertain to most anybody else, just ask it at the end. I'm happy to stay and answer questions, but I want to get out questions that may pertain to many students first. So the first thing I wanted to address is whether or not you should test at all. Almost 100% of colleges are test optional now. And initially, test optional was test optional not because it was a philosophical decision, but because no schools were open during the quarantine part of the pandemic, so that kids actually couldn't take the test last year and the end of the year before. Now that schools are open and kids can take the test, most schools have not gone back to requiring tests. They consider test optional. But test optional is not the same thing as test blind. There are one or two schools, and only one or two schools, that have announced that they're test blind. If you send the scores, they won't look at them. That's not true of the vast majority of colleges that Yorktown students are applying to. Those are test optional, which means if you send them, we'll look at them. And you should send them. I wanted to show you, it's going to take me a second to get some of these things up, so I apologize if there's a delay, but take a look at these. I just put on a Word document just for my own self, some headlines that I saw recently, very recently. SAT and ACT scores may be optional this year, but many top schools still rely on them. 3 out of every 4 students accepted at Penn through early admission submitted test scores. At Georgetown, 93% submitted test scores. The big story in college admissions is huge surplus in applications over the last year. It's not just early admissions. Highly selective private colleges, top state universities have seen applications skyrocket. So nearly everybody is sending in scores to selective colleges. Here from another publication, kids who submitted test scores had a clear advantage. Half of Emory's applicants submitted scores, but 68% of those admitted did. At the most selective colleges, 60 to 70% of admitted students submitted scores. So you can see from these that what I'm seeing is that the more selective the college, the more likely it is that your student will probably need to submit scores. The good news is that you can apply to the selective schools without the scores. So that if your student, after preparation, a lot of good preparation with an appropriate teacher, tutor, class, or working on his or her own, if they still can't achieve a score that makes that student competitive, the college will accept the application with no scores. I just don't think it should be a choice A strategy, that before you decide, I'm not going to bother, you put your heart and soul into the test. And then really, if you just can't bring it up to where you need to for the most selective schools, don't send it there. But schools that are a little bit further down on the list, good match schools or safety schools, definitely I would send them there. And the way you know whether to send them is if your students' scores are either at the midpoint of a very selective school or in the upper third of a slightly less selective school. If the average SAT is 1400 as a middle point and your kid gets 1200, don't send it. But if the average middle point is 1400 and your student has a 1470 or 1500, yes, I'd probably send it, because otherwise it looks like you're hiding something. So I think, yes, you test. And I think the tests are getting more and more and more competitive, because kids who scored mediocre scores aren't sending them. Only the kids who have superior scores are sending them. So it's even a tighter race in terms of scores than it was before. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about what else colleges are looking for besides test scores. But there's always an option not to send it in the end, but I think you prepare to take them. You have, the pros are that you have more schools that you can apply to, and you've got a better chance of getting in. The con of trying it is you've put some time and maybe some money into tutoring or testing, and that's it. And you had to get up on a Saturday morning. There really are no downside in terms of applying to college other than preparation time, and a lot of pros. Are there any questions so far? I just wanted to stop before I get on to which test to take.
No, I don't see any questions.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
but feel free to put them in if you want. So parents ask me all the time whether their kids should take SATs or ACTs. And the answer is, if I want to be snarky, is yes. That most of my students take both SATs and ACTs. Most of them take one of each. But frankly, they don't have to. The ACT has a science section and the SAT doesn't. So if you took an SAT, you still are not going to know how you are going to do on the ACT science. So forget that. There's a grammar section on each of them that tests exactly the same content, exactly. So there's no point in taking the grammar section, it's going to be the same. So really, you just need to take the math and the reading. So if your student is willing to sit down and take both SAT math sections, which is about an hour and a half, timed with a calculator and without calculator, as the section calls for it, maybe even in the public library, so that they're in more of a testing environment, not in their bedroom, not at the kitchen table, but at a serious simulating a testing environment. They take the math, then they take the ACT math, which is an hour, and see not only how did they do, but what percentile is that. You can't say, well, I got 4 questions wrong here and 5 questions wrong here, because they're scaled differently. So a good tutor, a class can tell you which one you do better in. But let's say that a kid is in the 50th percentile on both math tests. It's very likely that the student is going to feel more comfortable with one test than another, and feel like, if I work on this, I'm likely to really improve. But if this one just makes me nervous, I don't even want to work on that. The differences are that on the SAT, there are 2 math tests, one of which you're not allowed to use a calculator, both of which there are questions in the end where you have to come up with your own answer. It's not multiple choice. On the ACT, everything is multiple choice. You can use your calculator throughout. On the SAT, many of the questions are logic questions. On the ACT, it's more math content. On the ACT, you have to work very quickly. You either know it or you don't know it. On the SAT, you've got time to play around with it. So because of the speed, some kids actually do better. They either know it and move on, or they don't know it and move on. But the speed also makes some kids very, very nervous. So the only way to know which way a student will do better is to have them take one of each. The same is true with the reading. The ACT reading and the SAT reading are different. The SAT is much longer. Most students will say that the reading on both of them is very boring, but the SAT is worse. The SAT has historical content, essays. There'll be a speech from 1750. The ACTs don't have that. The SAT has questions like, here's question one, what line? Question two is, what line did you see it on? So if you get question one wrong, you're likely to get question two wrong. The ACTs don't have that. On the other hand, the SAT questions go in line number order, which makes it easier to read a chunk and then answer some, read a chunk and then answer some. The ACTs don't go in that order, but it's shorter. Completely shorter, so that kids who don't love reading often do better on the ACT, but you've got to move very quickly once again. So the only way to figure it out is to, again, have your students sit down and take the reading section of the SAT timed, and then do the ACT section timed. And by the time you've taken the reading of both and the math of both, you'll have a very good idea of which test is probably best for your student without having to pay $50, $60 and get them up on a Saturday morning to take one of each. I see there's a question about which one schools prefer, and the answer is no school has a preference. No school has a preference, not MIT, not Harvard, none of the schools, and certainly not lower level schools, have a preference. They used to. If you think that the SATs are a preferred test, you were right until 2015. In 2015, early, like 2010, more and more kids were taking the ACTs, and fewer kids were taking the SATs, to the point where by far more kids in the United States were taking ACTs than SATs. So in 2015, the College Board scrapped the entire SATs, completely did away with it. It used to be a very, very different test. It had analogies. It had 10 sections, not 4 sections. There were penalties for guessing wrong. It was a very different test. And so colleges preferred the SATs. The College Board rebuilt the SATs to be nearly exactly like the ACTs, since that's what kids wanted to take. I guess they figured we'll give them what they want. And now both tests nearly the same thing. The differences are cosmetic or they're slight. So since they're the same test, in essence, colleges don't care which one the kid takes. They genuinely don't care. Whichever one your student, it shows your student at an advantage, is fine. And
So
I'll get to
Wendy-
where you can take practice tests in a moment.
Okay, and so does
yeah.
that really answer the first question? How do different schools value SAT versus ACT?
They don't.
Yeah, I would think so too.
Is that your experience, Cindy?
Yeah, I've never, in meeting with admission counselors for years now, no one said SAT versus ACT.
Right.
They used to say, some of them would say, oh, we want SAT 2s, but of course that doesn't exist anymore. So
Right.
that's the only time they would distinguish.
Right.
The other follow-on to that question was whether there was a preference for different types of schools. For instance, liberal arts versus technical schools. Does it matter which
Right.
one you take?
Couldn't matter less. It just doesn't matter. The science section in the ACT is mostly, has nothing to, very, very little to do with, do you remember any science that was taught to you in school? It's mostly, can you read this graph or chart? Can you make assumptions and predictions based on these graphs and charts. And the SAT, that's on the ACT. The SAT gets around it by including graphs and charts within the reading section and even within the grammar section, so that they can say to parents, look, we have STEM questions too. So really, the colleges don't care. They get the same information from both schools, whether you know something, whether you know the math deeply or you know it quickly. What's the difference, really? And I see very little differences, frankly. The differences are subtle. Somebody who's in the 80th percentile on one test is likely to be in the 80th percentile on the other test, more or less. Maybe on one test, they're in the 82nd percentile, and the other test, they're in the 79th percentile. So there's a slight advantage there of one over the other, but not huge. I rarely see a situation where a student is a star in one test and does miserably in the other test. They really genuinely test the same things. So the colleges don't care, universities don't care. The prestige of the college doesn't seem to matter. The focus of the college doesn't seem to matter. I've had kids go to very selective schools with both tests. So it doesn't matter. I'm going to stop and answer where you can get those practice tests on the College Board website. If you click on SAT and then click on practice, you have to scroll a bit. They hide it because they hide things that are free. So if you click on practice, all the stuff you have to pay for comes up, their classes and their online classes and their books, everything that you have to pay for comes up. Keep scrolling, and it'll say free practice tests at the bottom. There are 8 full-length practice tests with answers on the College Board website if you find them. And I wouldn't do them online. I would print them out, but you only have to print out the reading sections and the math section. On the ACT website, which is act.org, it's even harder to find. Cindy, I was meant to ask you this. Do you have, the free booklets for the guidance department? Do they have similar booklets for the ACT available?
They did, and I don't know if I've seen a whole lot over the last few years.
There are available online. It's just a lot of print.
Exactly. They don't want to spend the money to send them and ship them
Got it. Okay. So you certainly can get it online. The problem is if you go to act.org and then you click in as a student or parent, and it's called something like the student guide, which doesn't look like a free test. And then you've got to give them your name and email address before they would open up their site and let you see the free test. But go ahead and do that. It's just they sell your name and email address to prospective colleges. That's not a bad thing. You want colleges to know you've got a kid who wants to go to school. So, and then you scroll through this booklet about the kind of test it is and what kind of pencils you can use, and you keep scrolling, and it's on page 11 or 13, depending on the year. And there is a complete full ACT followed by the answers. So it's there also. There's only one where there's 8 on the College Board site, but all you need is one for the purposes of determining whether or not you want to take the test. There is, where did I put it? Here. If you decide you want to buy a book, the blue book by the College Board, the main blue big College Board book, is the one that you should buy for the College Board because it has the actual tests in it. And this is the book that you want if your student is going to be taking the ACTs. It is the actual, it's by the company that makes the ACTs. And again, it has actual ACTs there as opposed to what Kaplan or Princeton Review or somebody else thinks is kind of similar to the test. I don't like those other books. I don't trust them. Sometimes they make the test too hard so that your student can feel like by the time he takes the actual test, wow, that was easy, but it throws off kids' confidence. I really don't like them. So I only use the books by the actual, but there are at least one free ACT and several free SATs online. Before I look at more questions, I'm just going to keep going with this
Wendy,
section.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Wendy. If
Yeah,
I could
please.
just add, not kind of a shameless plug, but not a shameless plug, but the PTSA does sponsor a ACT review course and SAT review course. The fall ones have already happened, and there will be ones again in the spring. So if your student is looking for resources to prepare for the test, they do use those books, and the cost of the course includes those particular books, the one for ACT and SAT. So I just wanted to put that in. If you're on Twitter following the PTSA, you'll get those notices.
Right. So when I first started doing SATs, my first 2 years, I taught a course, probably similar to the one that the PTSA offers. It's very good for giving your student an overview. It's less good if your student has particular strengths and particular areas they want to bulk up, because I found as a teacher, I needed to cover things in a measured way so that every single topic was covered. I couldn't stop and really address kids' concerns in a meaningful way, or if somebody already got that, they understood that I still had to go over it for the other kids, and now they're looking at their phones the whole time. But it's a very efficient way to overview the whole process. Yeah, please, if you're taking the ACT, do not take the optional essay writing section. This is a list. Where is it? Nope. Here it is. I downloaded a list of the colleges that require it. I'm going to share screen now. Here it is. Okay. These are the list of colleges that require the optional essay. That's it. 8 in the whole country, including West Point. So if your student is headed to West Point, yes, he or she has to take the writing section. That's the only school that I've ever heard any of our students go to of this list. They must be Midwestern schools. I never heard of them, I have to say. But I know that West Point does require it. Other than that, no, not one school could care less. I'm going to go into the when in a second. So it doesn't really matter which one you take. I wanted to just do a few pros and cons of each one. The SAT math, the pros of the SAT are that the math has got a lot of reasoning in it. So even if a student isn't great in math, they very often can figure out answers, and there's no discrete science section. You get a lot more time per question on the SAT, a lot. A pro of the ACT is that the reading is substantially easier. You can use a calculator throughout the math section. All the math questions are multiple choice. So even if you don't have a clue, pick B, pick whatever your favorite letter is. Some of the answers have to be B. So you've got a chance of getting them right. Whereas if it's fill in your own answer, you're out of luck with that question. Some of the cons of the SAT are that the reading is much more boring. It's much longer. They have those historical essays, which our kids are just not good at. They have those what line did you find it on questions, which they give you so much more time on the SAT, but you need it. Because if you need to keep going back into the essay over and over again to figure out what line you saw something on, that's more time consuming. So it feels like generous that they're giving you a lot of time, but you need a lot of time. If you're having logic questions on the math, you need more time than if it's just, here's an equation, solve it. So another SAT for the math, is that there's a new calculator section, and that makes some kids panic. The con for the ACT is just that it's fast. It's really, really fast. And not every kid does well at fast. And the science is very difficult the first time a kid tries it. I've never, ever, ever met a kid who finished the first time. With practice, they do. Each time a kid tries the science section, it gets better and better and better and better. They have a more of a sense of what's being asked and how to go around it, and how to save the questions that they're likely to do least well in for the end. So kids' science scores do go up with practice, but initially it's very intimidating. So you could take one of each. Many kids do. You can take two of each. I have a lot of kids who take two ACTs, two SATs, and then they pick what they want. You cannot use the math from the SAT and the grammar from the ACT, or the reading from the ACT and the, no. You can use SAT March math and ACT May reading, but you cannot take one section from one. You can submit both. If you have a kid who's a good test taker and does really very solidly on both tests, submit them both. You're saying to the school, look, I don't care how you test me, I'm going to do well. But they won't look at section grammar from this test and section math from the other test, just from different date administrations of the same test. Speaking of that, the ACT pre-super scores, if you have them send, let's say your student takes 3 different ACTs, they will send to colleges, look, here's the best English from across those 3, here's the best math from across those 3, here's the best grammar, here's the best science, and here's the best combined possible total. But they will send the individual scores, but they pre-super score it. The SAT doesn't do that, but the vast majority of colleges do super score, which means if you send them more than one SAT, they'll look at the best math, the best grammar and reading. I suppose the theory is that you can have a bad day. You can have a day where you weren't thinking clearly, the room was too hot, you had a cold, but if you're not that bright, you can't have a smart day by mistake. So that your highest score in each section is likely closest to accurate, that you're more likely, it's what is really what the student can do. You just can't have a smart day by mistake, but you can have a dumb day by mistake. So they'll look at the highest one, but they will see it, but they don't pay attention to it really. The vast majority of schools super score.
Wendy, can I tag
yeah, please.
and ask you if the correlate, or I guess kind of to follow on that, somebody had asked earlier, you can't send the tests for 2 different scores for 2 different tests, but can you send only one section of the same test, or do you have to send the entire test scores?
The whole test goes. So if your student did, let's say in March, your kid took the SATs and did really poorly on the math, but decently on the reading. And then you take it again in May, and they did slightly worse on the reading because you were really focusing on the math, and they did brilliantly on the math. You can't send just the reading of one and just the math of another. You have to trust that that's what they're going to look at. The entire test goes with good and bad. The entire test goes. So if you're sending the March scores, you're sending the March scores, every section of March. If you're sending the May scores as well, every section of May goes, and you're hoping that the schools will look at the best of March and the best of May. If you take it in June as well, let's say, and you did better in both categories in June, don't send March and don't send May. If you take it March, May, and June, and March is just a disaster, and May and June are much better, don't send March. There are very, very few schools that require that you send all scores. There are some. I understand, especially in the South, I understand that Duke wants to see all of them. 3 out of the 7 Ivy Leagues asked to, and I don't remember which ones they are, asked to see all scores. So I would not not send my kid in to take an SAT or an ACT unprepared just to see. I think that's very damaging. And I cannot tell you the number of parents who say, well, I just had him take an ACT just to see how we would do. You wouldn't send a kid into a chemistry test just to see how I would do if he never looked at the chapter headings. Why would you do that when there are free tests that you can take at home? Especially when there's some of the better schools want to see all of the tests. But it's more than that. When a kid does very poorly on a test, they cannot go, it's very hard to go into the next test of that. If you do terribly on an ACT, to go and take the ACTs again, in the back of your head somewhere, if you're a 16-year-old, you're saying, I suck at this test. I'm terrible at this test. I tried it before. I couldn't do it. What makes me think I can? I meant to put even more time into it than I did. I could have been studying more. I'm terrible. Who could get a good score with that going on in the back of your head? Better not to go in and take it until you're at least somewhat prepared. You don't have to be at the highest level of preparation. But if you've begun to prepare and you say, all right, this is a benchmark of where I am now and what do I continue to need to work on, that's fair. But to go in completely unprepared, I've never seen a test before, what the heck, let's see. A PSAT, by all means, because no college sees that unless you want to send it to them, unless you get national merit commendable or above, then they see what that score is. But otherwise, colleges don't see that. Sure, send them in just to see how they do. But an SAT or ACT, I would not send a kid in. What the heck? Let's just see how it goes.
So Wendy, could I interrupt 1 minute?
Yeah.
One person asked, how many scores can you send to a school? Now, I was going to type in the answer by text and say there's no limit, but
Right.
I don't know if that's good advice. I mean, it's
Right.
true, but it's not the greatest advice. So I'm going to let you handle that.
Sure. I mean, you could. Here's the thing. If you take it, a kid could take it 6 times, 7 times. And I've seen kids take it 6 or 7 times. But if you send those scores in, it makes it look like you're playing games, like you're just spinning a wheel and waiting to see which one comes up with the highest score, that you're not taking the preparation seriously. I wouldn't send in more than 3 scores, maybe, but why would you even send in 3? If you're going to send in, most kids don't send in SATs and ACTs. That's the unusual kid who's in the upper 90th percentile in both tests. My own kids are very high scoring. The ACTs weren't a thing then, but if they scored on the ACTs like they scored on the SATs, I probably would have sent them both in. But you send in your best math and your best reading if you're sending in the SATs. That's 2 tests. Even if you've taken it 6 times, why would you not want them to see your very best reading, writing, and your very best math? And the same thing with the ACTs. What you get on science and what you get on grammar is less important to the schools than what you get on reading and math. Send in your best reading, you send in your best math. If you're going into engineering or science, and there's one test where you did particularly well on science and not so well in the other sections, yes, maybe I would send in a 3rd, even if you took 6 tests, unless the school requires you to send in all 6. Otherwise, I would not. And I never would put the scores on the Common App. The Common App asks, do you want to report your scores here? The answer is always no, which doesn't preclude you from sending scores in directly from the College Board or ACT, not at all. It just means that you get to choose which schools see which scores. If you put it on the ACT, everybody sees everything. On the Common App, everybody sees everything. So generally, it's not a good policy. There are exceptional cases where I would say yes, which is why it's good to have either a friend who knows or a college advisor or somebody who knows your kid. But the vast majority of students shouldn't send more than 2 scores.
So here,
does that make sense to you, Cindy? Is that
Oh, yeah, totally. And I
Okay.
never knew why Common App even asked that question because I've never heard anybody report their scores on it. I always felt it was a trick question. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I really don't like it. Only if, if a kid got 1600, maybe they want the whole world to know. What's the harm in telling everybody? But even if you report your scores on the Common App, you still have to do precisely the same thing. You have to contact the College Board or ACT.org, and you still have to pay to get the scores sent to all those different schools you're applying to. It doesn't change the procedure in the slightest. I guess it's a way to brag if you have exceptional scores. That's all.
So I'm going to try and do two questions in
Sure.
one here. One person, and very patient because they asked 20 minutes ago, said, when do they take the test? But before you answer that, another person said, are the tests only offered in junior year, even if the student is taking junior classes in sophomore year? So I want to think that they should still wait to junior year. What would be the advantage in taking it in sophomore year?
I do have kids take it sophomore year, and it's a narrow band of kids, and I'll tell you why. Kids who are being recruited for sports very
Okay.
often take their first SAT in sophomore year if they're being recruited that early. Every year I see 2 kids every year like that, maybe 3, not a ton. But the recruiters, many schools want to maintain an average SAT across their athletic programs, or an average ACT. So if your kid is very high scoring on the ACT or SAT and a pretty good athlete, they can take a superb athlete who's low scoring if they take your kid. So they want to get a sense of where you're going to be on the SATs or ACTs very early, sophomore year. So every year I get 1 or 2 sports kids who takes it sophomore year. Unless that's your case, there's no advantage in taking it sophomore year, and several disadvantages. Even if you're taking 11th grade classes, you just don't have the maturity and the experience, the reading experience, to do very well on it, and the stamina to sit through 4-hour tests. Even if you think that your kid does, the tests are generally good for 5 years. So if you're about 1/3 of students in America do not grow in the same college that they started in as freshmen. About 1/3 of kids transfer over the course. And very often the new school that you're transferring to wants to see your SATs. So you want to make sure that then fairly late in your high school career, as opposed to early, so that they don't expire. They're only good for 5 years. If you take them too early, you're not going to be able to rely on them when you're in college. And who wants to start messing around with SATs in the middle of college? You don't. So there's no advantage, unless you're a sports kid who's being recruited. There's no advantage in taking them in 10th grade at all. If you if you have a very academic kid who winds up applying to some Ivy League schools, why would you want them to see a 10th grade SAT that's probably under where they could do at 11th grade? There's no advantage to it. If you want to know how your kid would do, give them a free test at home. There's no reason to put it on the record. Let them take a free test at home. The tests, I'll give you the dates of the tests, and tell you what I suggest. The majority of my students take the December tests, which now it's too late for that, for 11th graders. But they take the December tests in part because December is one of only 2 months where there's both an SAT and an ACT. There's an SAT in December and an ACT in December, and it gives you a lot of information so that you can prep for the spring. And a lot of kids who play fair weather sports, like fall sports or spring sports, have the winter available, so that a lot of kids take December. The next possible test you can take is the February ACT. It used to be, even 2 to 3 years just before COVID, that New York State was not eligible for February. All of my February ACT students went to Danbury to take it. or Greenwich, or wherever they had family members that they could sleep overnight. Another problem with February test is that it can get snowed out. But there is a February test. The next, they sort of alternate after that. So there's a February ACT, a March SAT, April ACT, May SAT. So they go every other until June. They both give a June test. Then there's a July ACT. Again, that's not given in New York State, but you can go to Danbury and take it. You don't have to live in Connecticut to take the test in Connecticut. So there's a July, and I have a ton of kids who go to Danbury and take it. So there's a July ACT, and there's an August SAT, but it's the last week in August, right before school starts. And then there's a September ACT, which is a great time to take it. And there's both tests are given in October, SAT and ACT in October. The problem is that if you didn't do a December SAT and you think you want to take an SAT, your kid wants to take it, you've got to wait till March. And the March test, chronically, historically, is very low scoring. It's not that every kid gets a terrible score on March, but most kids are very unhappy with their March scores. And it happens to every tutor I know. I'm not sure whether it's because it's dark when they leave the house, or whether they haven't had enough months of schooling, or they do it on purpose. No idea. But I would say 80% of kids are very disappointed with their March scores. So if you're going in to take it, knowing you're going to take it at least once or twice more, and it's merely a snapshot of where you are now, no problem. If you're hoping this is your last score, March is not it. Because the next one after that is all the way until May, when a lot of kids are worried about spring sports and AP tests. Although I have to tell you, every college-bound kid is taking a May SAT and they're taking AP tests. They don't conflict. They're not at the same time. Prepping for one doesn't mean that you can't prep for another. Don't baby your kids. They can prep for both. It's not a problem. I've been seeing this for 30 some odd years. Some parents saying my kids can't take a May SAT because, my child has AP tests. Yeah, well, so does everybody else. It's not a problem. June, it's harder. There is a June SAT, but the kids have half a foot out the door by then. It is harder to take a test then. The ACTs, I think, are better timed. It's February, April, but then all the way till June, and then July, and then September. So most kids take 2 SATs and 2 ACTs, or they take 3 of one test. That's common. But certainly there are kids who take more than that, and there are a few kids who take fewer than that. When I am working with kids privately, I say to them, there's a continuum. You might say to me, look, I will test as much as I need to get the highest possible score. That's what I want. Or you might say to me, look, I'm going to test once, maybe twice. After that, leave me alone. Whatever I get, I get. So where do you fall on that continuum? So I would ask, your children better than I know your children. Figure out whether whether it's just they don't want to get up on Saturday morning, or they'll be happy they took that one extra test down the road. There are no SAT subject tests anymore. Those aren't a thing. They've done away with them completely. You couldn't take one if you wanted. They're just not there. One of the problems with the ACT is that on some test administrations, there are fewer seats. Yorktown High School doesn't give SATs or ACTs every single time they're given. They pick a few and they host those. Lakeland picks other ones and hosts those. So it may be that your student has to go to Lakeland for a test or Mayapack for a test. That's fine. But just because there is a deadline left, if you have to sign up for the March test by, I'm making this up, February 15th, if you get on February 13th, there may be no seats left between White Plains and Poughkeepsie. So yes, you can take it, but you're going to have a heck of a drive. So don't wait until you're getting close to the deadline to sign up for these tests. If you sign up for a test and you need to change the date, you can. They charge you, but it's not as much as signing up from scratch for the test. But it can certainly be done. So
I have,
please don't wait.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
If a student is looking to be admitted to a school for a specific artistic talent, where the art music portfolio are important for admission, the importance of achievement tests is diminished in these cases. And I'll just like add on to that question. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier, because there's so many test, optional schools this year. How do other things, other components weigh out in an admission review? So that's
It depends so much on the school. A small artsy school, it wants to see that art, whether it's fine arts or some performance, something, or photography, whatever it is. An art school, or a school that's known for art or has a distinct art school within a university, really wants to see that. If it's a bigger school, a bigger university, if your kid's going to go to Penn State and major in drama, first he's got to get into Penn State. Then they'll worry about whether or not he can make the drama program. So the scores matter just as much as they matter if you're going to be majoring in history. In that case, it depends wildly on the school. You certainly can contact each school that you think your student might be interested in and ask that question. I would have the student ask every single time that you contact a school. It's a check mark under something that they call demonstrated interest, which I was going to get into in a bit, which is, other than the scores, what do colleges look for? And one of the primary things is demonstrated interest. It's one thing if mommy asks, it's a whole nother thing if the student asks. So I'm not going to tell if you write the email and sign your kid's name, but it should come from your student to ask, I'm interested in your art program. How much weight do you put on standardized test scores? What percentage of your, not of the applicants, but of your admitted students submit standardized test scores is a reasonable question coming from your student. Did you have something else before I go on? What I was going to talk about next is sort of the timing of all this, and then what they look for in addition. Do you have questions before I move on to that?
Yeah, so in the timing, just as long as you cover how long it takes to get the results of your test, someone asked for that. But before we move on, I know you were saying apply to register for your test early, and I was guilty as charged on that my first time going around.
I missed it too. I did the same thing with my oldest son.
Oh, wow, I feel so much better.
No. We wound up signing him up to take fortunately, it was only a subject test. And the only open spot was in Poughkeepsie. And we signed him up, and at the last minute decided not to go.
How early before the test can you register?
A good 2 months.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
I mean, more or less, some, but at least 2 months before the test.
Okay. All right.
And it takes typically 2.5 weeks for the scores to come back. The SATs have a release date, and they announce, here's when the scores are coming back. And 9 times out of 10, they come back on that date. However, if there's a national disaster, Hurricane Katrina or Sandy, if a part of the country is affected and they can't release scores to that part of the state, nobody gets scores. It goes out to the whole country at once. The ACTs, I think they throw up the Scantrons, and as they come down, they grade them and score them. It says 2 weeks on the website. It says 2 weeks to 2 months, and they mean it. You could get your kid's score back in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. The kid who sat next to him gets it back in 4 weeks. The kid who sat next to him gets it back in 6 weeks. Two kids with the same last name can get it back a week apart. It doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason, but more than 90% of my kids get them back within 3 weeks. The kids who don't tend to be kids who take them under special conditions, like time and a half, or if they have a special location, or if they take them during the school week. Those kids come in slower. Everybody else takes about 2.5, 3 weeks for both tests. So for the ACTs, you have to keep checking every few days because they roll them out little by little. Whereas on the SATs, the whole country gets them on the same day.
Okay, here's a question that kind of follows that, and then I'll let you go forward because we're almost
Sure.
caught up on the question queue. So SAT will let you send reports to schools before you take the test.
Don't.
Okay, that's why I wanted them to hear that.
Terrible idea. They only offer that for their own profit and benefit. Do not. They give you something like 4 tests that you can send, for free before you take the test. What if your kids' those are your kids' lowest scores? Yes, you can pay to have the higher scores sent later, but why ever would you want a college to see those low scores? Why even alert a college that he got at one point of 400 on the math? Now he's getting a 600 on the math. Why would you want a college to know that? Do not send them. Yes, you'll save yourself about $20 if you do it. So in the course of applying to college, $20 is nothing more than a meal at McDonald's. Really, there's no good reason for sending any scores to any colleges. You don't even know if he's going to wind up applying to those schools. Do not send them out. Don't. I don't know another way to say it.
No, that was
Wait until all the tests are done and you know where the kid is applying, and then send them then. There's no advantage to doing it any other way.
Okay, no open questions. Go.
Okay.
All right.
I wanted to talk about when you should take the test, not now that you have the dates, and when you should start thinking about colleges. On the one hand, I wrote a blog entry a little while back saying, should you start prepping your kid in 6th or 7th grade? Yes. So the New York Times called me about that one, and I was in the Times for that. But I don't mean having your child take practice tests. But for example, in 6th grade, they pick a foreign language. If you want your student to be able to take that foreign language all the way through high school, it can't be French, because French is only given maybe once a day when it gets to the upper levels. And if that one period a day is the same period that is orchestra, and your kid wants to be in the orchestra, you now cannot take French. So unless you've got a very strong reason, like you have French relatives and you're hoping that your kid can speak French to his relatives, that's a legitimate reason. But just because it sounds pretty, or just because you took French, not good enough. They should be taking Spanish or Italian, whatever there's a ton of in the school, so that if your kid's schedule needs to be adjusted early in the year and they're taking Spanish second period, but now they really want to take the science second, well, there's also Spanish given period 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8. So it starts very early. It's easier to go down a level in math and science than to go up. If your student is on the cusp of taking an advanced math in the middle school and an advanced science in 8th grade, taking earth science instead of, you can always, when your kid gets to the high school, say, you know what, I don't think he's ready for honors chem. Let him take regular chem. But if he's been taking Regents level all along, it's very hard to jump into an honors level of something, or to skip a year of science or math. Really hard. So I'm not saying that you need to track your students, but prepare just the same way that an Olympic hopeful didn't start ice skating at 16. They started when they were 3 or 4. you have to look at your kid and say, is this student likely to be highly academic or not so much? Is this kid enjoy an academic challenge, or does it frighten my student? Whatever it is, middle school is when you start to look at these things and you continue to reevaluate along with your guidance counselor each year. Is my student on track for the most appropriate future for my student? And that's where the guidance department comes in. I tell every kid, get to know your guidance counselor. Guidance counselors become guidance counselors because they like to help. If they didn't like to help, they wouldn't be guidance counselors. So you're not hearing this, Cindy. I tell them, poke your head in and say to your guidance counselor, my schedule's working great, thank you. Something. Get to know your kid's guidance counselor, because they're the ones who are going to propose the schedule that's appropriate for your child. And if they don't really know your child, they can only propose a generic kind of plan. So, and don't hesitate to advocate for your child. If your child was slotted for a Regents level and you think your child can do honors level, have an honest talk with your guidance counselor about why you think that maybe they're not seeing the full picture. It's not a matter of bullying. It's a matter of discussing what sharing what you know about your student with the guidance counselor.
So
But I wanted to,
actually,
sorry,
someone put it down about the French. I wasn't going to interrupt you when you
yeah, go
said
ahead.
French, goes against orchestra. I actually do that scheduling, and I've never put French opposite orchestra.
Well, yeah, it was just an example that in middle school you're not really thinking about what's going to fly well in high school, but they should be. One of my son's best friend took French because his mom comes from France and his grandmother speaks French, and it was absolutely the right thing for this kid to do.
Right. And usually French too is in 9th grade. And I never have anything like, if I have one section of math 2H, I don't put it opposite the French. I make sure that the French 2 doesn't interfere with anything.
Well, that's what makes Yorktown High School Guidance Department superior, Cindy.
Well, thank you.
I mean, that's
French,
usual.
French 3, same thing. We haven't offered college or AP French in the past. Now we have a new instructor. I don't know where that's headed, but it would be a problem even if they're taking Spanish or Italian, because by the time they get in 11th and 12th grade, we offer the AP Italian, the AP Spanish, but we're only offering one section of that. And we are only offering one section of AP Physics. And I try my best not to have them interfere with each other or it interfere with AP Statistics, that we might have one of one year and then another year have 2 AP Statistics. So once you get up until like an 11th and 12th grade, it's almost impossible to please everybody or to match what everybody needs. But so for the parent that put in about French.
But you're saying that like an AP French or a college level French isn't even offered.
Well, no, but again, we have a new instructor and it may be offered in the future, but we haven't had it the past few years. But we have had AP Italian, we have had AP Spanish, but again, they're single classes, they're singletons. So it's going to interfere with something, or something will, it might interfere with BC calculus. So I'll move it someplace else, but then the BC calculus and the physics honors and the AP statistics, if you have a triple play there, I might not be able to get that. But for the 9th and 10th grades, we can pretty much rule out those conflicts with the French.
I have had kids over the course of 35 years, including my own son, who've had conflicts like that. But what I tell them is, please remind your guidance counselor, when your guidance counselor is writing, every guidance counselor has to write recommendations for each student who's applying to college. And there's a lot that they can put in there that it wouldn't sound right if you said yourself. So if you couldn't take physics because you were taking AP Spanish, let's say, your guidance counselor can certainly write in a recommendation, but for the scheduling conflict, this student was eligible to take both, and would have happily taken both, but we just couldn't schedule it, so that the college knows that it's not that your child was avoiding upper level classes. So that can be addressed from the guide. And I always tell kids to speak to their guidance counselors about doing that.
Okay, we're clear in the box. Go.
All right. So I wanted to back up and say most kids should be applying to any school that offers early action. They should be applying early action, because there are no disadvantages, only advantages. Early action means if I get my application in by, say, October 15th or October 30th or November 1st, you, the college, will let me know by December 15th or Christmas time or whatever their date is, whether I'm in or not. You're not guaranteeing you're going to go there. You're not making a commitment. You're just saying, I'll tell you early, so you tell me early. A greater percentage of kids get in early action than regular decision. So there's no reason not to do it. Plus, colleges are looking for demonstrated interest, and that's the primary way to demonstrate interest is I want to go to your school so badly that my application was done good and early. So if a school early decision is a different thing, that means you've identified one school, one dream school that if I got in there, I would drop everything and go, that is my one true love dream school, and I'll go there no matter what. And you're making a commitment to go there. And that has the highest acceptance rate, but you cannot compare. You can't say, well, I was going to go there, but you didn't offer me any money and this other school is offering money. Nope. You've committed to going there regardless. So a lot of people consider it a rich family game, because you can't compare financial aid offers that way. But early action, apply to as many schools as you can. Even if a school has only regular decision, let's say, why not get it in October? What's so terrible about showing the school that you're eager to go there and you've got your act together and you're not waiting for the last minute? What's so bad about that? So I would be prepared to get my applications in by mid-October. That means that your kids, so I'm backing up, I'm doing a reverse chronology. So that means that the college application essay has to be done by, I would say, the end of the summer. However busy they are in the summer, they're going to be busier in September. And yes, I know that they do work on the essays in September and October in English class. I think that puts a lot of pressure on kids, and I'm not always convinced that a student's most unique expression comes out of a high school English class. In general, I'm only rarely happy with those essays. The essay should be done by the end of August. Well, in order to do the essay by the end of August, you have to kind of have a list of schools that you're interested in, because you also want to tackle the supplemental essays. The more selective the college, the more likely it is to have a supplemental essay, which could be anything from why do you want to go to our school to why do you want to major, what you want to major in, or some of them are funky, like what's page 392 of your autobiography, or they have, what person would you like to eat dinner with, living or dead, creative things like that. Big pain in the neck for students, but there you go. But many schools have, why do you want to go here? Or why do you want to major in? Or tell me something else about one of your activities. Those are fairly common. You want to address them all. Well, you need to know what schools you're applying to. So you want to have your list built good and early. And in order to build a list, you have to go visit schools. So you can visit schools at any point, but seeing a school over the summer when there's nobody on campus is not like seeing it when there are kids on campus. So usually the second and third week in May are finals weeks for most colleges, and they don't have tours then. So you want to get your touring in by mid-March You don't want to go in the dead of winter when everybody's hiding. So you want to go from mid-March, let's say, to the end of April. Those are peak weeks to go. And you should go on a weekend. But if it means you've got to miss a Friday or a Monday, if you tell the teachers in advance, it's considered an excused absence. It's still an absence, but it's not like cutting or something. If you tell them, you don't have to lie and say, my kid's got a cold, he's going on college tours, is a legitimate thing to say once or twice. So you want to do those college tours March, April, and maybe the first week in May. Well, in order to go on college tours, you need to have a list of what colleges you're interested in. So you might say, I'm going to do the New York State tours. I'm going to do Oneonta and then Binghamton and then Ithaca, Cornell, and then Syracuse. That's one trip. Or I'm going to go do Pennsylvania and I'm going to do Bucknell, Lafayette, Lehigh, and maybe Delaware. Or I'm going to do the Washington, D.C., Virginia trip. In order to group them geographically, you've got to have a list. So if you're going to start touring in March, you want to start making a list in December, and we're halfway through December. So it is not at all too late and not at all too early to get started on this. And by started on this, I mean making a list of every school you've heard of that you think might be right, going on, help me pick out a college website. The College Board has got a very good college search system where they ask you about your interests and your grades and all that, and they propose a bunch of schools. The first few paid to be there, just like a Google search. The first few paid to be there. After that, it's a good list. I happen to think that US News is superior. They do charge. It's $40 for, it's not a recurring charge. It's, you get 12 months access for $40. And like the College Board website will tell you whether or not they have junior year abroad. US News tells you which countries junior year abroad goes to in that particular college and what percentage of the kids actually go. Or College Board tells you what varsity sports there are. US News tells you what percentage of kids actually play varsity sports. So it's got a lot more information. I think it's well worth the $40. It's less than one college application. And they also have a tool that helps you narrow down which colleges to approach. And so that you know which colleges to go on their website, poke around and fill out the form that says, send me more information. When you fill out that form, they're going to send you a brochure in the mail, but they're also going to email you. They track how long it takes for you to open that email. They know whether you open it right away. They know whether you open it within 24 hours. They know whether you don't open it for 6 months. They also know whether you click on any of the links there and how long you spend on their website. So you open it up right away, you click on it, and then you go make yourself a turkey sandwich. But they only know that you're on their website for that amount of time. So either your students, or if you want to help them out with it, somebody needs to be opening those emails promptly. If the email says, would you like a username and password? Heck yes, I want a username and password. You treat every school as if it's your favorite school until you know.
So can I just interject here?
Yeah, I was about to tell them why the guidance department is so important in this process.
Well, I'll stop then.
The guidance department not only has a list of when and where the college fairs are, which are good, but at the college fair is just usually an alumnus is sitting behind a desk. You go, you fill out the postcards, send me more information postcard. That's a good thing to do. A more important thing to do is colleges send admissions counselors to the school, or nowadays they sometimes have it
all virtual right now.
Okay. And those are the actual admissions people who are deciding whether or not your kid gets in. And if they bother to take time out of their schedule to come, whether it's real or virtual, to Yorktown High School, and your kid can't bother to pick his behind up at English class and get there, it doesn't say a lot for demonstrated interest. Those are must-dos. If the kid has any interest in the school at all, those are must-attends.
So Wendy, a couple of things that I've seen over my 27 years, trends is more students applying to way more colleges
Oh,
than
it's getting
ever,
worse. Yeah.
and not visiting until after they get in. That's a big trend too. Like, I'll wait and see if I get in and then I'll visit. Do you want to speak to both of those trends? Because I feel
Yes.
like, I'm a lone voice out here.
Well,
Um,
I know that you prefer fewer schools than I do. I'm okay with 12 schools. I know you'd rather have 8,
oh,
but I'm not
listen,
okay,
I
but I'm
would
not okay
not.
with 20 schools. Yeah.
Oh, well, then you wouldn't be okay with 36 because we've
Oh,
had someone do
no,
that.
no.
No.
Because schools can find out who else you're applying to. They absolutely can. They
And
don't
it
always, but
just,
they have access to that.
and
You
it
don't want them
just
to see
makes
that
the
they're, sorry?
Now it just makes the decision later. You're just, instead of narrowing down in the beginning, you're narrowing down later when it gets more complicated with financial aid and who has a
Right.
better program.
I don't
So,
mind if a kid really feels that they can't narrow. And I've had that sometimes. Then I say to them, all right, pick 3 safety schools. And by safety school, I mean, if you're still breathing when they get the application, you're in. Pick 3 dream schools. Like everybody who's applying to this school has your GPA or better. Everybody who's applying to school has your SATs or better, but who knows? Maybe they're looking for a viola player this year, so go for it. But you don't have a good chance. And then pick maybe 4 schools that you've got a fair shot of getting in. And let's do those. The other ones, if you are applying early action, you're going to get some answers by mid-December. If you're getting too many no's, you can always look at your B list and start sending some of those in. But I would make an A list, like a first round and a second round. That way you're not telling a kid you can't apply here. You're just saying not yet. It seems to help them psychologically a little bit. But I think it's okay to not go to every single school, but you've got to go to representative schools. You have to know what an urban school versus a suburban or a rural school looks like. You've got to know what a big school versus a small school looks like, because what's in your head about what it means to be at a small school may not be the actuality of it. What looks good on paper may not feel, maybe the surrounding neighborhood is kind of creepy. Or maybe what you thought was going to be small is actually warm and charming. You really don't know until you go. Your kid's going to live there for 4 years, hopefully. It's got to feel right. And sometimes it just doesn't feel. I tell kids this story that all my friends were applying to Brandeis and Tufts. Those were 2 hot schools when I was applying. So we went to go see Brandeis and Tufts. We got to Tufts, and I sat in the back of the car with my arms folded. And I said to my father, I'm not getting out of the car. Because I was 16, and that's how 16-year-old girls do. Said, I hate this school. He said, get out of the car, between his teeth. I said, I'm not. It looks creepy. It looks like a scene from The Wizard of Oz where they're going through the forest and I'm waiting for the trees to throw apples at me. It's horrible. I'm not. Then I got out of the car anyway, of course, and did the tour. Hated it. We went to Brandeis and there were open lawns and people throwing frisbees, and it was a sun, angels were singing. And I said, this is a good school. When I got home, I said to my friends, well, I saw both schools. And they said, I know, one was horrible and one was great, right? I said, yeah. I said, that Tufts. And they said, wait, no, Brandeis is the horrible one. Tufts is wonderful. It's just what a college should look like. So you've got to feel it. You've really got to feel it. It just got to feel right to you. And if you don't go, you won't know. You don't have to go to every last school. I mean, if your kid gets into Harvard, you're probably sending them, even if they never visited. And who cares what the dorms look like in Harvard, or the cafeteria for that matter. But especially the schools that they're likely to wind up in. Not only should you go so that the kid can get a feel of it, but colleges make lists of who visits and who doesn't. So unless it's in California or Florida, you should try to get there. I mean, it was a little different during COVID, but now we're starting to see parents come back to visit schools again. And maybe you hook up with another family and you're going to go take the kids to see 3 schools in New York State, and this other family is going to take the kids to the Pennsylvania schools. But it's better for them to go. Do you feel that way too, Cindy?
Oh, yeah, totally, totally. Looking at the next question, I'm going to
Yeah.
try to answer this. My daughter and I get daily alerts of visiting college representatives, but is there a planned schedule so my daughter can make arrangements in advance, so she could attend particular colleges and universities of interest? I believe on the guidance website, we do put a monthly schedule
Yes, I
there.
think I've seen it.
Okay, good,
I think
good,
I've
good.
seen
And
it.
then,
Yeah, of who's coming that month.
and then I'll just throw this last question in. You referenced the U.S. News and World Report
I
earlier.
love that. Yeah.
I know, I could see it.
Yeah.
Anyway, what exactly was that you were referencing? Is
It's
that
called
like,
College Compass, COMPASS. And it's you can get a lot of free information on US News, like their education division, and then within education there's an undergraduate division. And if you start clicking around, pretty soon they're going to say, would you like to buy College Compass? That's what it is. It's a $40 12 months access.
one thing I would add to that, I meant to say it before, is we have the Naviance program that people use. And one of the reasons we loved it way back in like 2002 when we first ordered it, is because it has scattergrams.
Right.
So instead of apples and oranges, you're comparing Braeburn apples to Braeburn apples. So College Board might say a particular school, their particular campus, you need like, a solid B or an 85 average, but an 85 average here is very different than an 85 average down the road in another school district, or an 85 average upstate New York. So do you want to speak to that a
So yeah,
little bit?
I'm gonna slightly disagree with you, but not wholly. I
Okay, because
think
that's
those
never happened.
No, I think the scattergrams are great. And I think
Mhm.
it's good because you're right. Getting an 85 in Arkansas is not the same as getting an 85 in Yorktown, for sure.
Okay.
But because it's a smaller cohort of kids,
Hmm.
did this kid get in because his parents went there, or because he's a minority, or did he get in because he's an athlete, or did he get in because they always take kids of that grade, with those
I think
demographics?
those are the outliers, but I think if you're looking at like, say, Binghamton, where we have, something like
Okay.
90 applications a year, that will give you a truer sense. I
I
think,
would certainly use Naviance in conjunction with one of the bigger databases. So if
oh,
you're looking at more than one database, you're more likely to get accurate information than if you only look in one place.
okay. Thoughts on applying international colleges?
Oh, I have less experience with that because I have a ton of experience of international students trying to come to the United States to go to school.
True, true.
A ton. But in fact, I do a long, crazy story, but I do a ton of pro bono work at 1 or 2 in the morning with Bangladeshi students trying to come to the United States. I have for years. It's very weird how that got started, but I spend hours every week working with Bangladeshi students trying to come here, and successfully I get a lot of them here, but very little experience applying for US kids applying to go elsewhere. So I'm not the best person to ask about that.
Well, interesting, because now I know why you answer emails at like 3 in the morning. That makes sense.
It's 11 hours off, like, or 13 hours off. It's off. So it's a Bangladeshi student 15 years ago read one of my blogs and emailed me and said, "Okay, there's a whole bunch of us who need help. Could you come on this website and help us?" And I'm helping them through their Facebook page ever since. And it's very satisfying. They don't have anybody. They ask each other questions and give each other wrong answers. So it's nice to go in there and straighten them all out. I wanted to talk for a minute, if I could, on a related topic of what the colleges are looking for if they're not looking for scores. And what they're looking for is, I have some graphic about this that I thought would be interesting. Yeah, let me share this. Okay. This is about 2 years old, so it's not very, very current, but I've been checking and checking, and these numbers haven't really changed. This is from the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, and they all colleges across the country. What do you care about most? Grades are the most. Grades in college courses. There are many colleges that recalculate everybody's GPA because each school does it slightly differently. Some have letter grades, some have number grades. Some, like Yorktown, give a 0.5 bonus for honors and AP. Somers, I understand, at least a few years ago, gives a 0.4 for honors and a 0.6 for AP. So they recalculate, and they only based on the 5 majors. They recalculate based on English, math, science, social studies, and foreign language. They leave out gym and art and health and everything else. So that's what this next is. College prep is called numbers. This, I would say, they give even more influence now than they did then. But, and here's the essay. 25% say it has no influence at all. Those are generally the biggest schools. Our kids, a lot of our kids apply to University of Delaware, Penn State, big schools like that. They often first sort by numbers. They want to know what your GPA is. They want to know what your scores are. And then if it's above this, you're an in. If it's below this, you're an out. In the middle, maybe they'll look at the essays. The smaller the school, the more they care about things like essays. But a larger number say that it has moderate or limited influence. Again, the more selective the school, the more they care about the essay. The more on the cusp the grades are, the more they care about the essay. Look at how many care about your guidance counselor's recommendation. That's why I say to the kids, when was the last time you checked in with your guidance counselor? When was the last time you stuck your head in and said, my schedule is working well? Or I'm thinking about next year. Can you tell me about the WISE program or something, anything? Get to know the guidance counselor and let the guidance counselor get to know you, because it matters. Here's demonstrated interest. A moderate influence and demonstrated interest, which means showing up at things, putting your name on lists, opening email address. Teacher recommendations, I think this is high. I don't think a lot of colleges that I send kids to are overly concerned with teacher recommendations unless they're outliers. If the teacher said, actually, confidentially, this kid's got a problem, that they sit up and take notice. Or if the teacher said, this is the finest student, the most remarkable student I've had in my 25 years of teaching, that they will take notice of. But what a good kid. Well, of course, you're going to ask a teacher who says, what a good kid. But this was an interesting point. Only demonstrated interest is not based on academics. Here is something, these are non-academic factors. And first generation status versus ethnicity has really flipped in the 30 some odd years that I'm attending. It used to be everybody knew if you were of a certain race, you had a bump up. That's less true now than it's ever been before. What matters the most of all these categories is first generation status. And by that, they mean neither parent has graduated from college. That is hugely important to colleges. It's a much bigger bump than being of a certain ethnicity. So those kids really have a distinct advantage. And that is legitimate. I mean, you can't say you haven't been to college if you have, but you should not feel abashed if you and your spouse haven't been to college. Colleges actually love to see that in a student. Ability to pay, I think, is underrated. I'm going to just see if there's more. Yeah, and early decision status matters. I think the vast majority of students that I see in Yorktown are hoping to get some sort of financial aid as opposed to scholarship money. Financial aid is only based on your income. Academic aid or scholarship money is only based on your academic or other requirements, your sports skills or something like that.
Okay. Oh,
and
sorry, Wendy.
that's all right. Yeah, tell me.
Two things. So we're going to try and wrap this up in the next 5 or 10 minutes.
Great. Okay.
Here's someone, and we're both going to answer this. Let's see if we agree or
Okay.
disagree. Is dropping a language and substituting with a class more related to what you plan to major in hurt your chances at being accepted to college? So my answer is more often than not, it might, I guess.
I'm surprised that you say that. I agree with you completely.
Oh, good. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised we agree. It would really depend. Like we have engineering, and perhaps if you were going to a real technical school, maybe dropping the language if, some guidance counselor put your French opposite your engineering class. Yeah, maybe you want to do that. But dropping the language and substituting with, say, a photography class. Well, if you want to major in photography
Right.
and you're looking at a pretty competitive school, I think dropping a language is going to hurt you to take an elective. So it would really depend. And that's when
I agree. The
counselor.
majority of the time, it's a mistake to drop a language class, even if if your kid's going to take an extra science and he wants to be an engineer and you think, well, this is going to be great. I don't know what your policy is about lunch these days. When my kids were going to Yorktown High School, other than freshman year, they were allowed to skip lunch and eat in some classes, not all classes, not science, not foreign language, but, math or English. If it was quick and, they had the teacher's permission. It's better to give up something else, because even an engineer who can do decently in a foreign language outshines an engineer who can only take math and science and can't succeed in anything else.
Okay. All right.
It
So
shows a breadth of being able to. There are many schools that require 3 years, and that does not count 7th and 8th grade. I know it's listed as Spanish 1 or Italian 1, but they're only looking at 9th through 12th, and they want to see at least grades 9, 10, and 11. And many of them require 3, recommend 4 years of a foreign language.
Okay. Any parting advice? How can people get in touch with you or get this blog?
You can read the blog through my website, which is www.wendysegaltutoring.com. Wendy, WENDYSEGAL. I think it's in the corner by my name. WendySegalTutoring.com, and the guidance counselor should be able to give it to you. Thank you. And you're welcome to ask me, if it's a 2-minute question, I'm happy to answer it. If it's more involved, then I'll probably ask you to book a session with me and we can meet in person or we can meet via Zoom. It's very useful when I get a chance to meet with parents and students, even if we're not going to be doing any tutoring yet, even if they're only in 10th grade and they want to get set up well for next year. It's a well worthwhile for most parents to see me before they think they might need to see me and get a sense.
Well, I really appreciate the partnership too.
Yeah.
People are chatting. Thanking you for the presentation.
I'm glad. Are there other things I haven't addressed that people were hoping I would?
I don't think so. And so I think I'm
Okay.
good. In the interest of time, I am going to wrap things up.
Sure. Please.
For those that weren't in at the beginning, this is being recorded, so it will be shared, available on the PTSA website. I'll share my screen super quickly with a shameless plug to support the PTSA, please. And you can
Always
access
wonderful, yeah.
and you can access the link to either join or make a donation on our website. We're also asking folks to join us for our general meetings and our annual meetings. These are all also posted on our website, and the links are available to join via Zoom on our website. So bottom line is a lot of information on the website. I want to say thank you so much, Wendy. I think I have.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was a lot of really useful information. Cindy, I don't know if you want to wrap things up, but at this point, I think we're wanting to say goodnight and thanking everybody.
No, great. The PTSA has done so many marvelous things over the years. And just last week, we were in a really good presentation for the ninth graders that I understand that you and Alliance for Safe Kids sponsored. So I appreciate that. And everything that you've done this year, bringing Wendy in and Peter Van Buskirk, we really are fortunate to have a very active PTSA. So thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Tomney.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being able to speak to people. And don't hesitate to ask a question if you've got one.
All right.
Great.
Thank you
Thank you.
everyone for joining. Have a good evening, and definitely feel
Thanks.
free to refer to resources on the website that we will share and post.
And thank you, Lisa, and for the PTSA as well for asking me to come.
All right. Good night, all.
Good
Good
night.
night.